Hi, TJ. Welcome to Creative Inspired Happy. I'm so thrilled to have you on the show because I'm a huge fan.
No, thank you so much for having me here. I appreciate it. I can't wait to talk about books.
Yeah, so Somewhere Beyond the Sea is out next week. That's the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea, which honestly is one of my favorite books of all time. Oh, thank you for that. You're so
Yeah,
you're so prepared with the actual
I
book.
know, right? It's one of the, it's my very last copy of the ARCs that went out because they did a very limited quantity of advanced reader copies for this book, so I kept one just for myself.
I do like to always have kind of one as my own souvenir. It is interesting
hmm
that they used to publish so many arcs and nowadays everything's digital. And so it feels like a special treasure to get printed
It
arcs.
does. It absolutely does. And something else that was really cool that happened recently in terms of something that doesn't really happen that much anymore is The House in the Cerulean Sea and a couple of my other books are getting large print editions, which you don't see. You remember when we were
Oh,
younger, we saw those all the time. You saw those in bookstores and libraries, but they kind of went by the wayside. But now they're making a comeback. So we're doing some large print editions too for these books, which is just awesome.
oh, that's exciting. Yeah, yeah. Well, so The House in the Cerulean Sea is the way that a lot of readers discovered you. And I know that in a way that's a little bit, it's the kind of thing that authors cringe at because you, like me, we've written a lot of books. I did some research on you before this podcast, and I think I counted on your website 34 books that have been published or that have been announced. I
Yeah,
might have counted wrong because I can't, it's hard to count that high.
it's
But
so many.
I
It's
would
so many.
love First, I would love to kind of take everyone back from to the beginning, how you got started, and I definitely want to talk about how prolific you are, and of course, we'll hit on Somewhere Beyond the Sea, and then you have another book coming out next year, Bones Beneath My Skin. Sorry, there's just so much to talk
So
about.
much.
How did you begin? I know. Did you always want to be a writer?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Ever since I was a kid, I grew up in the 80s and 90s in rural Oregon, and I always wanted to be a writer. I was a very vociferous reader. I read everything and anything I could get my hands on. It didn't matter if it was fiction, nonfiction, didn't matter if I didn't understand half of what was going on. Like many people from my generation, I read Stephen King at far too young an age. I remember reading The Stand at like age 11, not understanding most of it, but still being enthralled by it. Unfortunately, I grew up in a household where I was not appreciated by the people who should have loved me for who I was. I did not get the love and
Mm.
support and respect and encouragement that I wish I had gotten that I think a lot of people take for granted. So I kept what I loved a secret because I learned early on that if something that brought me joy was something that could be taken away. So I did a lot of this in
Mm.
secret. I would fill up these notebooks with stories off the top of my head. And it was not until I got into seventh grade that I met two women, Mrs. Benson, Mrs. Pfeiffer, my English teachers. They were the first people in my life to tell me I was good at something, and that happened to be writing. And in my very last class with them, they told me that one day they would see my name on a book in a bookstore. I am here because of them. I am here because of the power that some teachers can have over their students. I was very lucky to have them. Um, and it wasn't until I got into my 20s that I decided I wanted to write the great American novel. I was going to be that author and do all the big amazing author things. And so I wrote a book. I wrote a book called Bear Otter and the Kid. I had no idea what I was doing. So I Googled gay publishers, found the first gay publisher, clicked on their link, submitted it, and then like 6, 7 months later, the book came out. I mean, this was back in 2011, and things, even though that's not that long ago, things in publishing are extraordinarily different. I don't know that I could do what I did back in 2011 today, given that so there are so many tools now for authors, for first time authors, for whether it be indie published, self published, traditionally published. They have so many avenues to explore, and it can be difficult. It can be difficult to get into this job, but I've been doing it now for what, 14 years, and I've been writing full time since 2016. This job has afforded me some really great things, and I'm very happy about that. none more so than being able to walk into my office cubicle hell after working there for 10 years and say, hey, I quit. And so I've been writing full time ever since.
Yeah, that's amazing. And gosh, you were so prolific. I mean, were any of the books you have, I mean, like I said, 34. Were
Mm-hmm.
any of those manuscripts that you had written before you published your first one in 2011? Because otherwise, how do you maintain this pace?
No, that first book, well, there was a what I call a really bad first attempt that I tried in like 2007, 2008, something like that. I just, oh boy, that just did not work out. But yeah, Bear, Otter, and the Kid was the very first book that I wrote from beginning to end, and it was my very first book that was published. And you have to understand, back in the day, and I think it's still probably somewhat prevalent now, there's this idea on the self-publishing scene and indie scene that if you don't continually publish, people will forget who you are, because so many people publish books, so many people do that. And if you're not continually
Mhm.
publishing, then somebody's going to take your place. So that led to a unhealthy mindset in me where I was working 60 hours a week and then coming home at
Oh
like
my
6 o'clock
gosh.
at night and then writing until 1 o'clock in the morning and then getting up and going to
Wow.
work at like 6 o'clock in the morning. That I did that for years. And that the only reason I was able to do that was because A, I was in my 20s, and B, I wanted it that badly. Do I recommend people do that?
Mhm.
No, I mean, whatever works for you, but it was something that I wanted so desperately. And something I learned very early on is it's not about your first book. It's not about your second book
Mhm.
or even your third. It's about building a back catalog. So if somebody discovers you 10 years after you wrote your first book and they find a book that they like, they can be like, holy crap, this author has so many other books I can read. And that's been, I know I'm slowing down now. I'm 42 now. I can't do what I did before. But now I'm releasing one book a year as opposed to three or four. And that is so much more comfortable for me. I don't have to stress about everything and anything at all times. It's nice. I have worked my butt off to get here, but I'm very privileged to do what I do.
No, I love that. And I think that's very helpful for writers to remember that you have a long arc of a career, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
If you love writing, you're in this to be doing it for years, decades, and that there's no rush. And in my experience from my books, there are always going to be some books that do better than others. And as much as we hate
Mm-hmm.
that because we pour everything we have into every single one of our book babies, just because you have a book that's huge, it doesn't guarantee that the trajectory is just continually going up. Like it's not a rocket ship, right? Like
Right.
it's art. It's up and down, it's up and down. But
That which
but
is
the
why
overall path is still that you get to do this.
right, which is why when I hear authors, getting their first big book is a huge debut, like 7-figure deal, huge debut. It's everywhere. I wouldn't wish that on anyone because that is so difficult because you're starting at such a level. The only way to go is down at that point because nothing will ever be like that
Mhm.
again. And I wish the one thing I wish authors or potential authors remember is it's never about one book. It's never about the one thing that you do because let's face it, you publish that book, people will read it, and then they'll be like, "What's next? What are you doing now? What's going on?" It doesn't take people very long to read a 400-page novel, and they come out and they do it. And I just think that writers need to take care of themselves more than they do. I myself included. I there's times when I was not putting my health and sanity first, and now I do that, and now I feel
Mhm.
a lot more comfortable in my role and in my job.
And what are some of the boundaries you've put around yourself, or are they boundaries? What have you done to kind of put yourself prioritize sometimes over the work?
So since I do this full time, I treat it like a regular job, Monday through Friday. I don't, unless I'm like
Mhm.
really hardcore into a story that I want to keep on working on regardless, I don't do stuff on Saturdays and Sundays. I take away, I go out into nature, I go out with my dog, I go do other things. And something that I think is so funny is so many people think that a full-time writer means we're writing every hour of every single day. That's writing is like maybe 20% of the author process.
Mhm.
A lot of it is just me thinking. Is me thinking what would go here, what would go
Yes.
there, what would we do for here. And it's the actual writing part is the least amount of my job for the most part. And it's you got to set boundaries though. You got to know what is good for you, what your limits are. Limits are so important to know, because if you try and push
Mhm.
past those limits, maybe you'll get there a couple of times, but the more you do it, the harder it is to get back into it, and you'll burn out. It's so easy to burn out. The
Yeah.
creativity needs to be massaged, taken care of. It can't be something that you do 100% all the time. You have to be able to take breaks and give yourself a rest, because your brain needs to recharge just as much as your body does.
Yeah, I think that's so smart, so wise and healthy. Um, I would like to go back to this idea of it's not about one book. And yet at the same time, one book can completely blow up your career in an incredible
Mm-hmm.
way. And a lot of people, like I said earlier, they found you with The House in the Cerulean Sea. And so I would love to pick your brain about why do you think that that book became such a breakout hit? And do you actually agree with that, that this was like a big moment for you in your career, or do you disagree with that?
No, I think it was. Obviously, I'm very grateful for that. It's funny. I had so many people tell me they loved my debut with The House in the Cerulean Sea. I'm like, dude, I've been doing this for a lot longer than just a debut, and that's totally fine. I'm not worried about that. But um, look, when it, this ties into the sequel too, because no matter what I do, no matter what no matter what how good I am at as a writer, how bad I am, whatever, no matter what I do, I cannot recreate the feeling that people had when they first read The House in the Cerulean Sea. I cannot. That's not something that is going to be done, because so many people discovered The House in the Cerulean Sea during the pandemic. It came out March 17th,
Mm.
2020, the week the pandemic exploded in the United States. And it kept gathering steam until a full 8 months later, it debuted on the New York Times bestseller list for like 10 weeks at that point. And it was, I honestly think that it was, as much as I wish the world hadn't had to go through that, it was the right book at the right time. It gave people were trapped in their homes, they were scared, didn't know what was going on, and here was a book about kindness and the Antichrist, and it was this moment where I don't think I could recreate even if I tried. It's not, and so I didn't try. Somewhere Beyond the Sea isn't meant to be, oh, here's just more of the same. I want to try and make you feel like you did back in 2021 or 2022. That's not what I wanted to do, because I knew I was not going to be able to recreate that. I think the reason, in addition to being the pandemic, I think the reason that so many people glommed onto it too was simply because it was something that they hadn't really read before. I mean, yes, we have books like Guards by Terry Pratchett, or Howl's Moving Castle by Diana Wynne Jones. We have so many ideas of what I call low stakes fantasy, but along with The House in the Cerulean Sea, Travis Baldry's Legends and Lattes helped to usher in this
Yes.
movement of quote unquote cozy fantasy, which I sometimes prickle at that label. That's fine. You can describe it how you want, but um, I just think that the book was right place, right time, and that's why it happened. And I've been very lucky that people followed me then into Under the Whispering Door, into In the Lives of Puppets, and
Hmm.
now Somewhere Beyond the Sea is looking like it's going to be the biggest launch of my career, which is extraordinary. It's extraordinary. And this look, I have told myself that this will probably be the biggest book I ever release. And I'm totally okay with that. If I never sell another
Yeah.
book
Yeah.
as much as The House in the Cerulean Sea and Somewhere Beyond the Sea sell, I'm totally fine with that. I don't need to be on bestseller lists. It's nice, it's wonderful, and I love it. I don't need to win awards. It's nice, it's lovely. It's wonderful. But I just want to write books, man. I just want to write stories. That's all I want to do. A lot of that other stuff is, again, wonderful, but it almost feels superfluous a little bit. I'm not going to change what I
Can I
do.
ask you like a point blank,
Yeah,
like honest question though?
yeah,
Is it only that you can say that because you've already had the New York Times bestsellers and the
absolutely,
Lambda Awards and everything
absolutely.
else? Yeah.
Absolutely is the reason I can say that. Absolutely. And look, I want to make sure that people understand. I'm not saying that's a bad thing, and I'm very, very fortunate to have what I have. But at the end of the day, maybe it opens a few doors that were closed to me before, but I'm not going to change what I do. I'm not going to change how I write stories. I'm not going to change just because one book might be more successful than another. I didn't write the sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea because the first one was successful. I wrote it because I wanted to. I wrote it because I thought there was more to tell in that world. And it just so happened that it's going to be a sequel to a successful book. And I'm lucky. I'm very, very lucky and appreciative of everything I've been given, everything I've worked for. Not a lot of people can say they're in my position, that they grew up doing what they love and that they wanted to do, and that's their job. And I realize how fortunate I am in that.
Yeah, I love that. And actually, you hit upon what my next question for you was going to be. I've been so curious why you decided to go back to this world. How do you decide to write a sequel? Because you do both. You do standalones, but you also write series. So I want to talk
Mm-hmm.
about that a little bit later, but specifically with Somewhere Beyond the Sea. Why did you go back? You said that you felt like there's more to tell in that
Mm-hmm.
story.
So I wrote this book in secret. I don't think even my publisher knew I was doing this. I wrote this in 2022, in the summer of 2022. And the reason this book exists is twofold. One, because Chauncey never shuts up in my head. I always hear Chauncey talking about anything and everything. And that is kind of an indication to me, okay, these characters aren't going away like they normally do. So there must be something more there. But the bigger reason, and the biggest thing, the reason this book exists is because here in the United States, I won't speak to anywhere else in the world, but here in the United States, there has been a rising anti-trans movement across the United States. And of course, this is happening in England too, with the queen anti-trans person in the world, J.K. Rowling. She is notorious and for her anti-trans sentiments and her vitriol towards trans people, specifically trans women. So I want to be clear with something before I go into why I wrote this book. Transphobia is so deeply rooted in misogyny that they're almost the same thing. That transphobia is pulled from misogyny. And the reason I can say that is because if you think about all the stories you've heard on the news about trans people being pulled from sports because they're that whatever reason, it's always trans women. It's never trans men. It's always trans women being pulled from these sports or being made to be taught a lesson or whatever. In the United States in 2021 and 2022, trans people, parents and guardians of trans youth, and gender affirming care specialists who work in the medical field were invited to testify in front of the United States government. What they did not know was that it was essentially an ambush. The politicians fell into two camps. Either A, they said, we hear you, we see you, we love you, and then they turned around and voted against pro-trans legislation. Or two, the worst ones, they sat there with their smarmy, condescending smiles and questioned trans people, questioned parents of trans youth about their bodies, about their minds, about their rights to exist. They basically ambushed these people who were there to speak their truth, who were there to proclaim themselves as living, breathing human beings. And they were met with crap. They were met with crap, absolute horseshit. And so what did I do? I actually talked to some of these people. I talked to them. I wanted to know what it was like sitting in front of people who were supposed to be representing your interests, only to turn around and basically have them castigate you. And so I asked them all a bunch of different questions, but one question I kept the same all the way throughout. If you knew going into it what would come of this, if you knew how these politicians would act, would you still go and testify? Everyone I asked that question to said unequivocally yes. The reason they said yes is because, again, they got to speak their truth. Yes, it was met with vitriol. Yes, it was met with horrific questions. But at the same time, they stood in front of the government and told their truth. I am so in awe of those people. I don't know if I would have the wherewithal or the empathy to be able to do something like that. Hear questions that are basically questioning parents about questioning their kids about transing them, if that's how it works. And it blows my mind that these people, these wonderful people, went there knowing that it might go wrong, and it did go wrong for a lot of them, because the politicians were horrible. I'm just so in awe of those people who can go and do something like that, that their bravery is extraordinary. And it reminded me of a scene at the very end of The House in the Cerulean Sea where Arthur was invited to testify in front of the government. And I wondered what would happen if Arthur went into this thinking his voice was finally going to be heard, only to have it be an ambush for people just like
Hmm.
our politicians, for people just like J.K. Rowling. And that's why the book exists. I wrote this book because I was asked a question last year or a couple of years ago. What do you think your legacy will be after you're gone? And me being me, I gave a I gave a pithy retort saying, I don't care. I'll be dead. Who cares what people think of me 50 or 100 years from now? But I realize that's not quite true. If I have any legacy whatsoever, I want to be known as the anti-J.K. Rowling. I want to be known as the person, the author who wrote stories filled with magic, where people could be who they are and be celebrated for it, and not torn down like she seems to think that needs to be done right now. So I wrote this book for my community. I wrote this book for the trans community. And I wrote this book because enough is enough. Enough is enough. I'm so sick and tired of people like J.K. Rowling getting to sit there in their golden throne with their billions of dollars, going after people who are just who are just trying to live. It makes no sense to me. Why, as human beings, do we spend our time tearing other people down, people that we don't know, people whose lives have no impact on our own? Why do we do that? I don't know, but it's enough. Enough is enough. We have to, we will never get anywhere if we cannot come together and work together.
Wow, thank you. That was not the answer I was expecting for why you wrote a sequel. It's
Yeah.
so much deeper, so much more personal
Mm-hmm.
than I expected. Because I think a lot of people, they'll just it starts with the, oh, there's a character talking to me, and you think like, oh, I just want to send them on another adventure. So
Mm-hmm.
that's amazing. I can see why this is such a powerful book for you. I'm very happy for you that your publisher is launching the book in such a big way. And
Mm-hmm.
I think the next few weeks are going to be huge for you.
Man, I
I
hope
kind of
so.
want to
I love
shift.
this
Oh,
book.
go ahead.
I love this book. I
Yeah.
love the story. I love the characters so much. And for anybody listening who think that this is going to be a darker, heavier book, yeah, it has a darker framing, but this book is still 100% about finding your joy and keeping your joy, and the weird and wonderful things that come out of these kids' mouths.
Well, I think that that's the thing, right? I mean, no matter what books you write, there's always going to be TJ in it. And so whatever your essence is, that is going to like that's going to show up in every book. Whether some of them are like, if they're fantasy, they're romance. I mean, you write YA, you write for adult, you're everywhere, and yet there's always that still quintessential you in your
Mm-hmm.
stories.
Well, I think that's
So
probably true of so many authors, is that we put bits and pieces of ourselves, some
mhm.
books more than others, but House in the Cerulean Sea and Somewhere Beyond the Sea is everything I wish for the world. It's everything I wish for queer kids who aren't growing up in places in good, happy homes like I did. I didn't get to have that. I'm writing for everybody who has ever felt othered or forgotten or been left behind, because you matter. They matter just as much as everybody else does.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So the question I had earlier too that I want to go back to is when you write a series versus when you write standalones, because you also have another book coming out in February of next year, which is called Bones Beneath My Skin. It is, I mean, you said you're releasing one book a year. So I suppose technically you are telling the truth because it's a different calendar year.
Well, no,
But
now
you
I'm
know,
a liar
it's
because I have
really
two
not,
books
it's
coming out
not
next
12
year.
months away.
Yeah. Well,
Oh
no,
my
because
gosh.
this year I had well, okay, so this year up to the how or the Somewhere Beyond the Sea, I've already released 3 books this year, because it's all Tor. My lovely publisher purchased some of my back catalog, including the Green Creek series, which just finished with the last book, just came out a couple of weeks ago. The Bones Beneath My Skin is a book that I self-published in 2018 that I it was at a very weird time. The former prior indie publisher was imploding, and I was trying to get all my books in one place. And I don't think I gave The Bones Beneath My Skin as much attention on the release as it could have. So I was very thrilled that Tor was like, "Yeah, we want to release your weird alien sci-fi thriller queer love story book." And I was like, "Hooray!" So yeah, that comes out next February.
I mean, that's exciting. That's super exciting. How do you decide if a book is a standalone or if it's a series?
Look, for someone who writes as many sequels as I do, what I'm probably going to say next is going to be a little shocking. I hate sequels. I hate writing sequels because you are always, when you're writing a standalone, anything is possible. You can do whatever you want. When you get to the sequel, you're constrained by the world that you created in the first book. So if you have a really cool idea for like a plot point and you start to write it and then you realize, oh no, I can't do it because that totally negates a rule that's in the first book, then you have to delete all of it even though it's really good. It can be frustrating. Sequels, I think my future is going to be many more standalones and much less sequels, because I don't get me wrong, I love going back and spending time with the same characters, getting to see where they go now. But it's a bit of, I like the newness. I love getting to explore a world I've never been to before and getting to meet characters I've never met before, which is why my book next year and the book in the year after that, and I think the book the year after that, they're all standalones. It's all because I have so many stories in my head and not enough life to tell them all. So I want to try and do as many things as I possibly can.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. How do you choose? How do you choose which ideas are the ones that get to become full-fledged books?
It's okay. So I mentioned earlier that I hear characters in my head. So I had a choice growing up. I could have either been a writer or psychotic. So I chose to be a writer. And all I do when I know a book is ready to be written is when the characters are basically shouting in my head. I hear them so loud.
Mm,
And when I finish, for the most part, they kind of go back to sleep, like Under the Whispering Door. I could easily write a sequel to that book, but I'm not going to, because I don't need to. In the Lives of Puppets, I can see another
right.
story in that world, but I don't need to because those characters are done. They're quiet. They're back to sleep. Chauncey in Somewhere Beyond the Sea, he'd never shut up. So I always had to go back to him, and it doesn't hurt that he's my favorite character in those books, but I'm making a conscious decision moving forward to move away from sequels and focus on more standalone stuff, because I want to write long novels. I want to write short novels. I want to write novellas. I want to get better at writing short stories. I have so many things that I want to do. And if I keep going back to the same universes over and over and over again, I'll get bored. The reader will get bored, and I won't have time to do some of the other cool stuff that I want to do.
Do you ever think about author branding? I mean, like I said, you've written in for so many different audiences. You write romance, you write fantasy, you're writing sci-fi. Have you ever felt constrained by, I need to be TJ Klune and TJ Klune writes these kinds of books?
Mm-mm. Because look, I, God bless the authors who can write in a series that's like 40 books long. God bless the authors who can write series after series after series. They finish one, they'll start a new series. I just I can't be like that anymore. I like going back to spending time with the characters. Like I wouldn't write a sequel if I didn't wholeheartedly believe in it. But I just think that there's
Mhm.
so many other things to try, so many other things to do. I want to do a graphic novel. I want to do a book with footnotes. I want to do a book where there's doodles in the margins all the way around. I have so many different things I want to do. I just my publisher, they are absolutely wonderful because they don't say, TJ, you can't write this, or TJ, you need to do something like this. They say, what did you do? And I give it to them and they say, okay, this works. I'm very lucky because that's not always how it works. I know that many authors are constrained by their genre, constrained by their editors, constrained by the publisher. I have just managed to finagle my career in such a way that I say, hey, I wrote a new book. I didn't tell anyone I was writing it, but here it is. Here you go. Do you want it? And we'll see what happens.
I love that. And I think it's actually the perfect seg to the last set of questions that I have, which comes from the creative, inspired, happy community. And the
Yay.
question is, what are your top 3 things that have helped your career? And one is a question of like, so you have to give one that's about the art or the writing, one about the business part of your career, and then one about how you have figured out how to find creative happiness or fulfillment.
Okay. So the business part of the career, I think that my biggest plus, the biggest boon that I've had throughout my entire career has been reader word of mouth. I don't think so many writers don't take that into consideration. When a person loves a
Mhm.
book and they talk about a book, they'll talk about it to whoever will listen. And then maybe one of those people that they talk to will pick up the book and, oh my gosh, maybe they love it too. So then they'll tell other people and they'll tell other people. I have been extraordinarily lucky in that regard. Word of mouth has been my biggest asset. And it's funny because, I never thought there would be a day where people would talk about my books, that people would be like, I love this. You should read it too. So you can have the same feeling that I do. There's something so absolutely magical about finding a book that you adore, either because you see yourself in or because you love the story, the characters, and getting to share that with someone else. That's so cool, except when they don't like it. Because then I'm like, you're not my friend. And what was the other? Okay, the other two. What were the other two?
A question about the art or the writing, and then the
Mhm.
other, and then so art or writing, and then the last one was like, how did you find creative happiness or fulfillment in your career?
I found that we'll go to the second one first. Creative happiness is so important to me, and again, it comes back to the idea that I'm very lucky in that I get to explore topics and ideas and values and ideals that are important to me, which is why you will never ever see a book of mine with a straight main character. That's just not what I do. I want every character in my books that are main and on page to have the queerness celebrated and to have their queerness enjoyed, because for so many years we didn't get that. We never got to see ourselves in books. The very first book I got to see a queer character in when I was a kid, at the end of the book, one of the main characters, one of the couples, one of the men in a relationship is murdered at the end of the book. He's assassinated. And that's the end of the book. And that's the first time I got to see queer people in a book. And one of them was dead because he was queer. And, me growing up in the 80s and 90s, there was a lot of AIDS fiction, HIV fiction from gay men writing about their trials and tribulations through the AIDS crisis and how Reagan basically left them to die. And for a long time, it seemed like to have queer people in a book, they had to suffer. They had to either
Hmm.
get sick, they had to die, they had to get injured, they had to be there to teach the straight characters a very valuable lesson. Why can't queer people be the heroes and the villains? Why can't they go on adventures? Why can't they save the day or destroy the world? Why can't they do all of these things? So that's what I want to do. I want to write queer people no matter what I do. And that's my happy spot, is that I get to put my community in books. And the first one, it was about art and creativity.
Art and writing, do you have a tip for just how to become a better writer, or like the things that's
Okay.
helped you the most as a writer?
Look. Reading is so important. You have to read as much as you write. Read more than you write. I've talked with authors who say, I haven't read a book in years. I'm like, how do you do things then? Reading is so important because not only does it help you find out what kind of voices there are in fiction, or what kind of, it can also help you find what kind of genre you want to write in, or what kind of stories you want to tell. Mm-hmm. Second, I want to say something that doesn't get brought up a whole lot, but I think it's so important, especially when it comes to reading and writing. Fan fiction is a vital and necessary part of literature. It is literature. If you are reading and you are reading fan fiction, that's reading. If you are writing and you are writing fan fiction, that's writing. What's so great about fan fiction is it gives burgeoning authors chances to work on their craft, because they already have a whole world with rules and characters, and they can go in and make up their own stories within those worlds. So they can focus on things like dialogue. They can focus on things like character placement, blocking, and all of that. And then when they start writing more and more and they get beyond that, or they're writing more complicated stories, then stuff like structure, like narrative arc, and all of that can come into play. I just think that there is so much about the quote unquote literati who look down upon fan fiction and fan fiction writers. And that is just BS, man. Fan fiction is just as necessary a part of writing and fiction as traditionally published books. And the last thing I'll say for creativity, the purpose of it, you have to take care of it. It is just like every other part of your body, your mind. You have to take care of your mind. And if you are not eating right, sleeping right, getting enough exercise, doing all this kind of stuff, your body will shut down. You have to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, your body will not be able to tell the stories you want it to tell. I wish more people would realize that it's not worth it to kill yourself over something. It's take care of yourself while you do it. If it takes a little bit longer, that's okay. The world will still be there when you're done. Just tell your story and do so in a way that you can do it without destroying who you are or your love for the craft.
I love that. Love that. Thank you so much. It's such a perfect way to end. Before we go, where can everyone find you online?
Yeah, so my remaining social media account is just Instagram. I'm at TJ Klune Books, or you can look at my website, tjklunebooks.com. There is a thing on my website that says blog, and you click on it. You'll see that I don't write blogs. So there's old stuff on there. It's usually just for appearances and stuff like that. But yeah, that's where I am.
I really love this, that now you can just focus your time and your creativity on your books instead of having to divide yourself in all these other places, blogging, all the different socials.
Look,
Are you going on tour?
That comes with privilege. I have to say that comes with privilege. There's authors who write daily blogs, weekly blogs. There's authors who do newsletters and stuff like that. That stuff terrifies me. So I'm not going to do anything like that. But yes, I will be going on tour starting September 10th. I will be on a 2-week tour through the United States and Canada. So come and see me. Fantastic. All that info is on my website. Can we find that on your website? Yeah, on my website.
Okay, tjklune.com, right?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Well, congratulations on Somewhere Beyond the Sea. I can't wait for everyone to read it next week when it's out on September 10th. It's been so fantastic having you. Thank you for sharing your wisdom and your experience.
Thank you so much for having me. And anybody who's listening, remember this. Be proud of who you are, because there are plenty of the people in this world who are going to tear you down. So be proud of who you are and speak your truth.
Want more writing advice and career insight? Join thousands for free at creativeinspiredhappy.com to go behind the scenes with best-selling authors and get access to our book club for writers, creativity challenges, and more. I can't wait to see you there.